Okay, so we are going to begin. All right, so this is a webinar on common mistakes in long-distance racing, kind of what could possibly go wrong. And it's presented by me because I kind of have an advanced degree in this topic because I've had it all go wrong in long-distance racing. So the four cornerstones of QT2, we will be addressing the training, race fueling, and pacing. Training falls under the branch of preparation, and race fueling and pacing fall under the branch of execution, which all comes into race outcome. Okay, so those are the three areas that we are going to hit today with the webinar. So, a little bit about me, and this is why I kind of have, I am maybe the best person to talk about this because I should know. I've done 25 or 26 Ironman finishes since July of 2000. I can't remember if it's 25 or 26. I feel like it's 26, but I can only account for 25 right now. No, oh shoot, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. My first 14 were not pretty at all. I had finishes that were, actually I just need to move this, I'm sorry. Let me move that out of the way. And I was racing as a pro. I've raced all of my Ironmans except for my very first as a pro, and I had many very disappointing finishes, 14, 10, 13, 20, which for some is definitely a great day, you know, if you're looking to finish, but I went into each of these races with goals that were, you know, 4 to 5 hours faster than what I was ending up with. So I'm sure you can understand my level of disappointment through there. Once I started making some serious changes, well thought out changes, I went through a series of about 4 Ironmen where they were kind of a gray middle. I had pretty decent races, nothing too magical, but nothing, but pretty decent. And then since I've done number 18 and on, I've had much better results. I've had a sub-9 finish, a 5th overall in Placid this past year. So I've seen some success at it as well. This is just my resume of the different Ironman I've done. I've finished Lake Placid 9 times. I've done Florida 4 times, Coeur d'Alene 3 times, once in Germany, once in St. George, once in Louisville, once in Canada. The Great Floridian, which is not a WTC race, but is a very nice iron distance race. I've done that once. Ironman Arizona, Cozumel, and twice in Kona. So if there's a mistake to be made, I have made it, and I have probably made it more than once, and I've learned many, many things along the way. So first thing we're going to tackle is training. The very first mistake that a lot of athletes will make when they prepare for any kind of long-distance race is they won't have a plan. And it kind of ends up being a, what do I feel like doing today? And I liken that to, you know, would you go on a long journey, unknown journey without a map? And so what happens with training without any kind of plan tends to lead to very erratic training, very little consistency. You know, you might ride here, you might run there. You kind of do what you feel like doing. And it ends up being very poor targeting of the physiology specific to the race distance. And it's just very, very erratic. And it's just, with any kind of long distance race, there does need to be a major commitment to the training because there have to be tremendous sacrifices along the way. It's kind of along the lines of committing to a graduate degree. You know, if you decide to get a degree, you know, after years outside of school, and you're gonna, you know, obviously you're working, and you're gonna continue on and try to go back to school and earn a degree, you have to commit to that. And it's the same thing when you train for any kind of long distance racing. So without a plan, you have very imbalanced training, a tendency to favor the activities we're good at with little focus on weaknesses. You know, so for instance, I as a runner always tended to run, do a lot of running. I would, you know, swim, bike here and there, but I always ran 5 days a week. Um, and then in the end, you get inappropriate training loads at inappropriate times. Without a plan for your long distance race, you probably spend much of the winter months when you could be building a great deal of base and becoming so much more aerobically efficient, not doing much. So you have very little early season training done, and then with a huge ramp as the race day nears. And this really looks like it's kind of like cramming for a final exam. You're cramming your training for the race, and it very often can lead to injury. So what should a plan look like? And I'm not saying this is what a typical QT2 periodization plan looks like. You've all seen it. I'm not saying it has to look like and has to be in this format, but what we do like to see, the very first thing I'm gonna point out is these vertical lines. These vertical lines, the black lines, separate the different phases of training. We have a base phase of training, we have a sport-specific strength phase of training, and then we have an anaerobic and peak phase of training. So this is the peak specifically. And then we have a taper down into the race, okay? And then if we look on the horizontal plane, you will see a very gradual increase, okay? And on the y-axis, this is volume, and this is weeks, okay, on the x-axis. So we have a very gradual increase in volume throughout the plan. And with that increase in volume, it's also an increase in intensity. So the base phase is very little intensity in the base phase. Sport-specific strength phase institutes a bit more intensity into it. As we leave the weight room, we take the stuff we have gained in the weight room and build it into more sport-specific motions. And then we go into the good old-fashioned anaerobic type work, you know, the track repeats, the bike intervals, and that kind of stuff. And then we enter a taper. Okay, so that's what we like to see in a plan. And the most important thing, I would say, is just a gradual increase, okay, of stress throughout the season. And what I talked about in the last slide is what you'll often see is a lot of cramming if you don't have a plan. So you might see training that looks like this, you know, kind of flatlined, and then as the race gets near and the weather gets nice, boom, okay, and that can oftentimes lead to injury because the joints and soft tissue is just not prepared for that kind of increase all of a sudden. Okay. Another mistake that's often made is too little volume. I am on sprint, trying to race Ironman on sprint training. That ends in a long and painful day, and this is something I did for a little while. I kind of grew wary of doing the Ironman training, and so I figured that I would do Ironman, but I would do so on sprint training, which incorporates very little durability training. And one thing that goes along with this, and I learned my lesson the hard way, we definitely advise athletes to make sure that they can meet at least 2/3 of the event's critical volume on a weekly basis during the peak weeks before committing to any kind of long distance race. So for Ironman, that is 2/3 of critical volume is 8,000 yards of swimming, 200 miles of biking, and 40 miles of running. And for the 70.3 distance, it's just half of that. That's 2/3 of the critical volume. And it's very important that you can commit to that kind of training before you commit to actually signing up for the race. And maybe it's just not in the cards for you right now. If you're relatively new to the sport, and that kind of training would be a big increase to you, and just not logistical for you, then it may not be time for you to do that kind of a race just yet. That may be a year or two in the future, and that's okay. I think it's better to wait and not risk the injury or the burnout, and do it and commit to the distance when you are able to make the commitment to the training. Doing an Ironman on much too little training can result in injury on race day. I'm sure many of us have heard of people who end up with a stress fracture during the bike or run portion. And oftentimes that can have a lot to do with just all of a sudden having too much on the plate on that one given day. It can typically happen very late into the race when the muscles in the body are just extremely tight and form really suffers. And it's with too little training, there's just almost certain system failure. It's a long, long marathon. It's a long walk, and I have made it. I have been out there walking for 13 to 16 miles of the marathon late into the night. So too little volume will equal system failure. And just a quick review of system failure. Critical volume is the minimum volume required to be able to maintain your speed potential over a given distance. So, for instance, if we'll just take a half marathon as an example. If the race distance is 13.1 miles, the critical volume for a 13.1 mile race is 30 miles of running. So if you have a speed potential curve that looks like this, okay, the dark white line, then if you do not meet critical volume for the half, if you don't meet the 30-mile minimum requirement, if you do meet the 30-mile minimum requirement, you'll be able to race the 13.1 mile race and maintain your speed potential curve. Okay, as you can see, the speed potential curve, you're much faster at a 5K than you are at a half marathon. Okay, so that's what this curve is speaking to, and you're faster at a half marathon than you are at a marathon. So this curve is speaking to that. But if you've only met critical volume for the half marathon, and you then go and try and race a marathon on that volume, what you're going to do is once you reach the half marathon distance, your speed is going to drastically decrease according to, similar to this. As you go on, it becomes, your durability is in great jeopardy after the half marathon. So you're not going to be able to maintain the same speed potential. And that's kind of what happened, and it's very, very common in Ironman distance racing, just because the race is too long. So just a couple things. Sometimes the double you know is better than the double you don't. For instance, don't buy a new bike within 6 weeks of an Ironman. You want to be well dialed into your racing position. That's something I have done. I bought a bike 3 weeks before my very first Ironman. I went into a bike shop just to buy a tube, and I walked out with a bike. I dumb luck that time. I lucked out, and the bike fit well. But very often, you're better off sticking with what you know, especially for an event like that. I recommend no major maintenance overhauls unless you can put in 200 to 300 miles on the road before a big race. There's always cable stretch. If you have new cables installed on your bike, they do stretch out, and once they stretch out, the shifting does not work well until they are tightened again, and you do not want that to occur on the race course. That is very, very frustrating. And one thing I like to say is known maintenance issues can be more manageable than the unknown. So, I've had instances where the derailleur rubs when I shift, or the bike doesn't shift just right, but I know exactly how to manage it because I've ridden, hundreds, if not thousands of miles with that. And if it's the week before the race, I think I would prefer to just race accordingly because I know how to manage the bike rather than have it fixed and maybe have another issue arise. So like I said, definitely nothing big, excuse me, unless you can put in a couple hundred miles on the bike before the big race. And then the last thing is stay away from the expo. Race week is not an appropriate time to try out new gear or products. I have a friend every time we go to an Ironman race, he buys a new wetsuit. It's not the time to change your hydration system. For instance, if you're accustomed to using an aero bottle or the bottles behind your seat, and I know that the bottle holder that sits on the aero bars is pretty cool looking, and all the pros are using it right now. But race week is not the time to make that change, and these are the kinds of things that people often do during race week. They'll make a major, major change. For instance, buying new running shoes race week. That's just those kinds of things. Stay away from the expo, okay, unless you absolutely have to have something. And just be careful with how you define absolutely have to have. Get mental. So my first thing with that is where's the faith? Have confidence in your preparation. There is a lot of self-doubt built into race week. When you begin your taper, with the reduction of training volume comes a reduction in confidence. I think we as triathletes, we not everyone, but we tend to be very type A. And when we are in constant motion and constant training, then we have a lot of confidence in our abilities. When our training is down a bit, we tend to lose that confidence. So just have faith in what you've done, and know and think about all the preparations that went into it and all the days that you felt good and you felt confident. But I always approach any long distance race, but especially Ironman, with a cautious optimism. I have faith in what I've done, but I know that I have to be smart about my training, or things could go very poorly. Be careful of overconfidence. This is pretty rare leading into a race amongst most of us. I would say only about 1% go into an Ironman feeling truly overconfident. But when it does occur is often early into the bike ride. It can rear its ugly head early into the bike when people are, when you get out of the water and the crowds are there, and you hop on your bike, and maybe you should be pushing 200 watts, but you're going down the road at 400 to 450 watts. That is going to come back to haunt you. Ironman is always about pacing. Okay, and the last thing I say with the mental game is patience. The race will not be won in the first 2 hours, but it can be lost. So keep that in mind. Too many people blow their Ironman, especially Ironman. This is not as big an issue in half Ironman, although it is an issue, but not as big. People really do ruin their races within the first couple hours, especially once they get onto the bike. Train for what you're racing. This is a big one. So my first thing is only about 10 to 20% of your training should sound like a prank phone call, and what I mean by that is a lot of heavy breathing. Too many athletes are training too hard when it comes to long distance racing. There is an obsession with the idea that training must be painful, and when you think about what you're going to be racing, for instance, the Ironman and even the half Ironman distance, they are really glorified Zone 1 and Zone 2 type efforts, respectively. And that's, for the most part, the intensity that you should be training at, because those are the energy systems that you're going to be using. So long distance racing is really approximately 92 to 99% aerobic in nature. The half Ironman may be more towards the 92%, but not much. The Ironman more towards the 99, but both of them are closer to 99 than they are to 92. Triathlon in general is over 85 to 90% aerobic, and that includes both sprint and ITU. You think about a sprint, and we think about how hard we go during a sprint, but it also tends to be about an hour-long race, which is a very, very aerobic distance. So to this end, really focus on training your aerobic energy, and I would urge you to fight there's going to be a lot of other athletes who are really focusing on tons and tons of intensity, and that really can tend to be counterproductive when training for long distance racing. That tends to train the body to become more and more efficient, utilizing glycogen as a fuel source rather than aerobic energy. Okay, and your goal is to use as much aerobic energy as possible, and to limit glycogen use. So this is just a quick chat about aerobic versus anaerobic. What we have here is we have a run distance on the y-axis, so it goes from 0 all the way up to the marathon from miles, and on the y-axis we have percentage of energy production. Excuse me. The blue curve is percent of energy production that comes from aerobic sources, and the pink curve is that which comes from anaerobic energy sources. So just a couple of notes. At 1 mile, okay, right around here, energy production is about 50% aerobic and 50% anaerobic. Okay, so you can see, even at a mile, that half of your energy production is coming from aerobic sources. After about 6 miles of racing, so for the top runners in the world, that's 28 minutes. For others, that's upwards of 45 minutes. Then you were talking about over 90% aerobic in nature. Okay, so you can see how powerful this is and how much aerobic energy is actually being used when you don't necessarily think of it as such. So over the course of a marathon, you would see that we're talking, very, very high 90% coming from aerobic energy. Okay, and the Ironman would be even just a little bit more so. Okay, so just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about your training and you feel pressure from others to increase the great intensity of your training, that it may not be the best thing for you. So, the taper, what is this all about? The taper is a necessary evil. There exists a delicate balance between rest and fitness. In long-distance racing, it is more important to be rested than it is to be sharp. Okay, in short course, it is more important to be sharp than it is to be rested. The taper is all about being as rested as possible, but still fit enough to execute the intended race. So we at QT2, we use 2 taper schemes. The A taper, which is a taper that we use for most A races. It's a higher volume. It's for higher volume athletes who can take a hit to their trailing volume in the interest of rest. And it's used for most Ironman athletes unless volume tends to be low. So for low volume athletes, they can't take a hit to their trailing volume. The B taper is used for most half Ironman athletes unless volume is very high. So if you're meeting critical volume, and if you're well above critical volume training for half Ironman, then we may use the A taper instead. Lower volume athletes who cannot take a hit to trailing volume, the added rest recovery could degrade their fitness more than it would help. Okay. Let's see. So let's take a look at the taper scheme. So this is the A taper. It's outlined in pink. What we have here is we have our 2 overload weeks followed by recovery week, and then we have this week here is kind of a halfer week. It's not quite up to the overload. It's not quite to what we were doing before, but it's much greater than the recovery stuff, and it's to kind of keep trailing volume up, and then we follow it off with 2 weeks of recovery going into the race. Okay, so this rest week would be very minimal. This would be This would be race week right here. This is the recovery week going into race week. So this is where, like I said before, a lot of athletes tend to slip in their confidence. They because of the lack of volume over the course of the taper, they start to wonder about if they have the ability to make it through. But this is very important for long distance racing, because it's very, very important to enter a long distance race very well rested. You've essentially peaked your fitness out here in these 2 overload weeks. Okay, so now it's just a matter of allowing the body to heal, recover, and rest going into race week down here. So that's what the A taper scheme looks like. The B taper is pretty much it's pretty similar, but it starts a week earlier to the race. So we have our overload weeks, then we have a recovery week, then we have that up week like we did with the A taper, and that's to kind of keep trailing volume high. Then it goes directly into race week. So we're missing out on that other recovery week before race week, and so this is what we might use for the lower volume athletes doing an Ironman, or most half Ironman athletes, unless they have very high volume. So trailing volume, just a quick revisit to trailing volume. Trailing volume is the average volume from your last 6 weeks of training, and we try to race when trailing volume is as high as possible, appropriate to the race. So, for instance, here is a graph out of Jesse's 6-week trailing volume from 2008. This is when his trailing volume was at its highest. This is when he's the most fit. This is when his training paces are going to be at their best. It's a period of heavy training, but if he were to race an Ironman during these weeks, he would go very slow because he would be very, very fatigued going into it. Okay, so what we do is we take a couple of recovery weeks and get the trailing volume down a bit. That allows his body to recover. So he's able to race an Ironman quite well after this peak. But you can see trailing volume is still quite high compared to any other time in the season. Okay, so that's just a quick revisit of trailing volume. So racing too close to the Ironman, that's another mistake a lot of people make. This is a quick chart outlining the different periods of time we should hold between a first race and a second race. So for instance, if you're, Michelle, are you having trouble hearing my voice? If you are holding less than 12 hours per week of training, then in your first race is a half Ironman, then we would not recommend doing another half Ironman for 6 weeks at a minimum. You can see that we have hyphens in the Ironman columns and rows because we do not recommend that you do an Ironman on less than 12 hours per week of volume. We do have those who do it, but we tend not to recommend it. If you're training for between, let's take the example over here. If you're more than 18 hours per week, which most people training for an Ironman will be, they have to, in order to meet the 2/3 of critical volume. Then if your first race is, if your second race is going to be an Ironman, okay, then you would not want to do a sprint closer than 2 weeks before, an Olympic closer than 3 weeks before, and then half Ironman closer than 4 weeks before your Ironman. And then if you're training that much, you could do 2 Ironmen, but you would want to separate them by at least 7 weeks. Okay, so and that's a mistake that some people can make, is they race too close to their race, or they choose the wrong distance, a distance that's too stressful for them to recover before their Ironman. Race fueling. This is a big one. Of the 14, my first 14 Ironman, which were a bit disappointing, race fueling tended to be the biggest issue I had. And number one is underfueling. The first thing I recommend is do not rush through aid stations, especially on the bike. Slow down. We often see a lot of athletes who get hot and heavy once they get on the bike, and they really want to go fast. And so when it comes to the aid station, they stick their arm out. If they grab a ball, it's great. If they don't, oh well. They'll get one at the next aid station. This is not good. You are much better off slowing down. Take your time. Grab the bottle. Put it in your aero bottle. You know, it's going to cost you maybe 20, 30 seconds, but losing those, not losing those 20 or 30 seconds can turn into hours later on in the race if you don't take care of your nutrition. The bike course is an excellent place to front load on calories for the demands of the run. Calorie consumption while running can be very difficult, so use the bike as a time to not necessarily push the pace, but to eat and drink and eat. Okay, fueling really is the fourth discipline in long distance racing. It is so vitally important to both the half Ironman and the Ironman distances. You could definitely fake your way through an Olympic distance race, and some of us can fake our way through a half Ironman, but you could not fake your way through an Ironman, and some of us cannot fake our way through a half Ironman. So this is really important. Pacing on your bike should be such that you're able to follow your race fueling plan. If you are unable to follow your race fueling plan, then you are going too hard on the bike, and that should be sign number one to slow down. Okay, it may feel right at the time, but be aware it will come back to haunt you. So, like I said, if you're having trouble getting the calories in, then you may want to back off on the pace. And this is also true of not just Ironman and half Ironman, but marathoning and half marathoning. If you find that you're having trouble getting your gel down or your cliff blocks down because you're breathing too heavy and you're running a marathon, you're probably running too hard, and you need to back off. Okay, so it does extend to that as well. Um, this slide is going to really speak to some of the inappropriate things that we see. And it's entitled Nuts and Nuts, Poor Fueling Sources. So we were at Ironman St. George just last year. We were walking through transition the morning of, the day before the race, I believe. And we saw a bento box filled with walnuts, cashews, mixed nuts. And Jesse said to me, should I just go over and steal those? Just, I feel like I'd be doing the guy a favor. And he didn't, but he's probably right. He probably would have been doing the guy a favor. That is just way too much fat. Race day is all about carbohydrate sources. You want to have as many carbohydrate sources as possible, and you want to limit your fat, protein, and fiber. Which is my last point in the slide. So so there is no place for mixed nuts on in a long distance race. Anything with peanut butter. A lot of people talk about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. The sandwich and the jelly part is fine. The peanut butter part is not good. Way high in fat. Water. A lot of people fuel using water. Water is not a good fuel source. It is not a fuel source. It's very good for hydrating, and I'm drinking water right now. But in terms of fueling a race effort, it is a blank. It does not have any carbohydrates. It has no sodium. It is not a good source. So we definitely advise people not to use water in any kind of training or racing effort. You want to use sports drinks. Granola. A lot of people like to use granola. That is, well, I should say, that can tend to be high in fat and pretty high in fiber, and you really don't want that sitting in your system. Coca-Cola, a lot of the race aid stations provide defizz Coke. That tends to be, the caffeine is okay, but it can be very, very acidic on the stomach. And there's a time and place for caffeine in a race, and you just want to be very careful with when and how you take it. It also tends to be fueled with high fructose corn syrup, where we try to avoid most things with high fructose corn syrup because they can tend to cause issues on the stomach, especially when the body is under stress. Coffee is a big one. That when we write race fueling plans, that is probably the #1 pushback that we get from athletes, because we definitely advise athletes not to have coffee, especially the morning of a race, and people tend to not be able to function without their morning coffee. But coffee is very high in caffeine, and you really don't want to have that much caffeine before you start the race. You're already going to be high enough with thousands of people around you. You're in the water, and there's helicopters overhead. Mike Riley is screaming. You really don't need 200 milligrams of caffeine pumping through your veins from your morning coffee. There's a time and place for caffeine, and it's later in the race. And coffee is also very, very acidic on the stomach, which can cause other GI issues. So some of my classic mistakes that I've made with race fueling, and these are some of them. I've made many, many more. I've done Ensure, and lots of it, which led to a lot of porta potty stops, because it tends to be very high in not very high, but rather high in fat and much too high in protein. It also has a lot of nutrients, which is something we don't need on race day. Race day is not a time for me to get my vitamin B and my vitamin C. I can do that the other 364 days of the year. I went one year with no food, just Carbo Pro, which, if anyone ever used Carbo Pro, it's a fueling source which is pure maltodextrin. You can, and I kid you not, you are able to fill an entire water bottle with this powder. So you can imagine a 24-ounce water bottle filled with powder. Let's say you fill 20 ounces of it with powder. and then you add water, and it dissolves. It's an amazing dissolving device. So you could end up with 1,200 calories in a bottle just from Carbo Pro. But it's a single sugar source, maltodextrin, and too much of that single sugar source causes major gastrointestinal issues, as experienced by me. That was another one of my porta potty runs. Go-Gurt, I have tried Go-Gurt. That is yogurt on the go. It's made for kids. You can pick it up in your local grocery store. I don't advise it. I had it all taped all to my bike, and it's dairy, and it doesn't do well in the stomach. There used to be a product in the late 90s, early 2000s called Jogmate. It was a protein. So it was pretty much a protein shake in paste form. It came in what was like a toothpaste type container, and you would squeeze it into your mouth. I tried that as a fueling source, and that was the exact opposite of what I should have been trying. We talk about high carbohydrate sources and low protein. This was high protein and low carbohydrate. I've done the Red Bull thing. I've done it pre-race right before the start, and so I had all the caffeine that went into it, and I swam to the first buoy like a fish, and I would typically throw up as I took the first turn buoy because of the Red Bull has a lot of stuff in it, but it also has a lot of caffeine, and it's carbonated as well. I've tried a pre-race trick called I would get up at 1 a.m. the night before the race and take in 1,100 calories, which left me feeling quite sick going into the race, and it would typically entail three cans of Ensure Plus and 2 bananas, and that was an interesting thing I've tried. I tried the bagel on the Aero bottle, which actually wasn't a terrible idea. But if you have an Aero bottle on your bike, at the front end of the bike, they have the straw sticking out. I would take the bagel and I would put it over the straw, so it would just sit there. And as I was racing, I would pick it up and eat it, much like you would a power bar, and place it back over the straw because I had the hole in the bagel. But one particular race, I ate through the bagel. I ate straight through the center of the bagel. I didn't think about eating around the bagel like it was a circle. I just ate straight through the middle. And so then I lost any grip I had. I couldn't place it over the Aero bottle straw, and I tried it, and it fell off. I lost my fueling source for the race. And then I did the old trick. I'm sure everyone has seen it, the power bars on the top tube. I highly recommend, if you don't have one, getting a bento box, which is the little container that sits on the top tube of your bike. You can put your fuel sources in. I have put the power bars on the very top tube of my bike, stuck them there, and at Lake Placid several years ago, I left transition on the bike, headed down the hill. I hit one bump. All of my power bars fell right off the top tube of the bike, and all my fuel was gone for the day. So those are just some of the different things I've tried and had not go so well before I used a QT2 fueling plan, which has really worked very well for me. Willy-nilly fueling is another one. I remember very, very well in 2002 at the Great Floridian Triathlon, myself and Brian Hughes of Fast Splits walking through Publix down in Claremont, Florida, which is their version of Stop and Shop or Shaw's, creating our fueling plan the night before the race. Oh, let's try Fig Newtons. Let's try this. Let's try that. I highly recommend having a fueling plan, whether or not you get it from QT2 or not, but have a fueling plan that you have practiced many times, many times. You must develop your gut in order to be able to handle the intake of the calories. And a fueling plan should be automatic. You should have no doubt when you put fuel into your mouth what the effect is going to be on your body. Okay, and a lot of people have fueling plans that they've never really practiced. I highly recommend, if you want to get a fueling plan from QT2, that you get it several months before your race, so you have plenty of time to practice it before your race. You definitely want to have at least, I would say, 2 months before your race of practicing it, and I highly recommend practicing it every single day with every single workout that you do. There should be, like I said before, there should be absolutely no doubt that what you put in your mouth, what the effect of what you put in your mouth is going to have on your body. With fueling, don't forget the sodium. This is why water is so dangerous for race fueling. We've all heard of the hyponatremia, but you need to make sure your sodium levels are up to snuff. I have in the past ignored that. At the same race where Brian and I walked through Publix looking for the night before creating our fueling plan, I became a major salt lick the next day at the race. And I remember very specifically weaving back and forth at about 90 miles into the bike. And I was so desperate for salt that I actually licked my own shoulders, just, you know, and I had plenty of salt caked on my body, and I was licking myself just to get a fuel source. Be very careful and be very aware of the sodium intakes that you need. It has a major effect on race performance. And to that end, know exactly what kind of sports drink is being served on the course. I mean, I don't mean Gatorade. I mean, know what kind of Gatorade, not the flavor. I'm going to speak to this in a little while. Not the flavor, but the nutrition contents that go into this, okay? And I'm going to come back to that in a little while. Aid stations, know what they are offering, okay? You must know what is on the course. The number one last-minute mistake that I typically see, and this is very often, especially if you race overseas, is not knowing the exact sports drink that is going to be served. And I don't, yeah, like I said, I don't mean the flavor. There's a significant difference between Gatorade G2, the stuff they sell in the store, and Gatorade Endurance or Power Bar Endurance. There's a major, major difference between those two. And if you race overseas, oftentimes, I know that Power Bar is the primary sponsor of WTC races, but not all. That tends to exist within the United States and not necessarily overseas. For instance, we raced in San Juan a couple of weeks ago, and they did not serve Power Bar Endurance. They served Gatorade G2. And the trick to that is that Power Bar Endurance and Gatorade Endurance offer 600 milligrams of sodium per bottle, per 24 ounces, I should say, I'm sorry. Gatorade G2 cuts that in half. That's only 300 milligrams of sodium. So over the course of a long day, that can really cut into your sodium intake, and you need to supplement that, because what's going to happen is not only will less sodium in intake affect your performance, but it can also cause GI issues. So you'll tend to get the sloshy stomach. So if you don't know what's on the course, you can't account for the differences. If you do know what's on the course and you know that they're going to be serving something that's lower in sodium, then you can maybe take salt tablets along the way to make up the difference and offset any difference. And if you do that, you're going to be very, very, very well ahead of the game. This is something that also occurred in Ironman Cozumel a couple of years ago, where they definitely serve the kind of Gatorade that you can just buy in the store here, which is very different than what a lot of athletes are accustomed to. And a lot of athletes go to a race expecting what they're accustomed to be served on the course, and don't make any accounting for that. So if you do make an accounting for that, you will be very much ahead of the game. So like I said, it really matters, and it must be accounted for in order to see your true performance. Caffeine. Caffeine is an ergogenic aid. It is not a magical potion. Caffeine does nothing more than decrease your perceived exertion. It makes hard things feel easier. It doesn't actually make them easier. It makes them feel easier. It does not allow you to do things that you cannot normally do. And caffeine, over time and with extended use, has less and less effect. More is needed for the same effect. For one thing I do, and I work very hard at this, is I do not have any caffeine in my life unless I am either racing or on a long training day. For instance, on Saturdays when I do my long bike rides, I will supplement with caffeine. And that I do that specifically to make sure that when I do use it during a race, that I can feel the effects of it. It has really worked to date very well. But like I said earlier, you really want to limit your pre-race coffee, and that's something that we get a lot of pushback about. But it's just too much caffeine too soon. You do not need to have that much caffeine an hour and a half before the race start. caffeine is the kind of thing that you want to build into throughout the course of the race. You want to have a caffeine high when you are deep into the marathon. You want to be coming down on a caffeine low. Once you start caffeinating, there is no turning back. Because as the caffeine starts to wear off, it's only going to make your effort seem more and more difficult. Okay, so that is very, very, very important in terms of having an enjoyable and successful day out on the course. Hydration. This is the most race day issues will be centered around this, and I liken this to I've never bought a Mercedes, but if you're going to spend $80,000 on a Mercedes, it's crazy not to get the leather seats. And what I mean by that is you make so many sacrifices training for a marathon, a half Ironman, or an Ironman. You know, so many sacrifices with the training, with all the travel, the money, the time away from your family, the time away from your friends, that it is crazy not to go just a little bit extra and find out how much hydration you need to make it through the day. Have a sweat test done. This is really, really, really important. I can think back to in 2006. I did Lake Placid. That was one of my. Those were in my years where I was doing okay at Ironman. I wasn't having meltdowns, but I wasn't quite racing up to where I thought my potential was. I did a 9:59. It was only by the grace of God. I nearly passed out at the finish line. My blood pressure was 72/48. I had consumed, I think, about 3 bottles of water or Gatorade, whatever they put in front of me. I took. I don't know what it was, but I didn't have a plan. And later on, I learned that probably about a year later, I actually did have a sweat test done, and I needed 8+ bottles of sports drink in order to finish an Ironman just a little bit dehydrated. We do allow just a little bit of dehydration at the end of a race. So I needed 8+ bottles of sports drink in order to get through a race just a little bit dehydrated, and I was regularly consuming about 3 bottles. So you can understand that the situation I was in. I finished the race. I ended up in the medical tent. I had 2 IVs. I felt dynamic after those IVs, but it can really impede upon performance, and it can also become dangerous. So like I said, it's crazy to do all of that work and all of that training and not take that extra measure of paying attention to how much hydration you may need. And for me, it was always something I just never accounted for. I just never thought it was all that important. I figured when I get thirsty, I'll drink. When I get hungry, I'll eat. And I just now that we know so much more about fueling and its effect on race performance, it's crazy not to have that be part and parcel to what you do. Race pacing. This is a big one in Ironman. You should always keep in mind on race morning that you did not become Macca overnight. A lot of people tend to believe that you become faster on race day. There is no race day magic. I highly recommend that going into a race, you use the QT2 goal setting strategy, which is set yourself some objectives, set yourself some targets, and set yourself some possible outcomes. By objectives, those are things that you have complete control over. I am gonna focus on my nutrition plan. I'm gonna stick to my pacing. I'm gonna stay in the game mentally. By targets, we say, okay, I am gonna shoot to maintain 250 watts. So that is something you have a little less control over. I'm going to shoot to maintain 250 watts. I'm going to try and keep my heart rate elevated when I get to the run. And then outcomes are, where you place in your age group. You don't set goals for yourself, based on other people. You have no control over where you're going to place in your age group. You have no control over who's going to show up to the race. So don't let that be the first prong of your goal setting. Your goal setting should be things that you have complete control over, and then from there, build goals, that maybe you have a little less control over. Okay? You just want a certain result does not mean just because you want a certain result does not mean that you're capable of it. You need to race within your means. We are not all born to race like Chris McCormick. I would love to be able to race like Chris McCormick. I am not. I was not. I do not have that ability, so I do not try to race like Chris McCormick. Your racing strategy and pacing should be based upon your training results. So use the training results that you have. Keep good data from all of your workouts and use that to inform how you're going to race on race day. Like I said before, Ironman, half Ironman, marathon, these are all efforts that are, the Ironman and the marathon, they're very close to zone 1 type efforts. The half Ironman is very close to a zone 2 type effort. You should allow the training that you've done and the data that you have from that training to pace yourself accordingly. This is very, very important. And then the last thing is let the crazies go, especially early into the bike. This is where you can really blow your race. Stick to your pacing plan. Do not, it can be very, very frustrating. People get out of the swim, they hop on the bike, and they start barreling down the road at 25 miles an hour, and it's very easy to get caught up in that hype. And I think of the Rudyard Kipling poem. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, just think of everyone who's blowing down the road, and those are the ones who are losing their heads, and you're the one who's keeping your head. Stick to your pacing plan. You'll be a man, my son. That's the very end of the poem. You'll cross the line probably well before them. Okay. Swim start placement. This is pretty important. This is another one where you use your head. If you start at the front, you will get pummeled. Are you mentally and physically prepared to handle that without panic? The Ironman swim is very violent. Be aware of that. What are your abilities? Are you able to handle that in the water? If you're not, then stop further back. If you start at the back, you will be behind a great mass of human. There's tons of people in front of you. Will you grow frustrated by not being able to actually swim around these people? I highly recommend that people, when they get into the water at the beginning of the race, just start talking to people. Ask others, what do you think you're going to swim? What do you think you're going to swim? What are you shooting for? And look for people who are going after the same goals that you're going after, and then stay with them. And the more people that do that, the more the placement at the swim start people will place themselves in a correct manner, so that people are not getting unnecessarily pummeled and people are not stuck at the back and unable to get around. Okay. What's the rush? This is all about transition. I'm a very big believer, especially in long distance racing, in taking your time in transition. I don't mean sit down and have breakfast with the volunteers, but take your time, get it right the first time. Mistakes that are made in transition can haunt you the entire day. For instance, get your racing singlet on properly. It takes 5 extra seconds to make sure it's on, not folded up underneath you. Take those 5 extra seconds to get it. Put your sunscreen on. If you have to take a nutrition in transition, do so. If you have to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. Put your race number on, because it's a penalty not to have your race number on. Make sure your bike shoes aren't too tight, or when you in T2 when you come in and put your running shoes on, make sure your insoles don't fold up underneath you. Take your time. Make sure your running shoes aren't too loose. Put a hat on, especially if it's going to be a very sunny day. I highly recommend when you come into transition, grab a volunteer, grab one, and have them be with you. Okay, they are there to help. They tend to be great people, and let them help you. Absolutely, let them help you. Okay, but take your time. And this is one of the later ones. This is the baton death march. This is something we see, especially later into the longer distance races. This can really happen at the marathon and at the Ironman. People who say I ran the entire marathon, but what I'm trying to get at here is sometimes running is not the fastest way to complete a race. Moving your body in a running motion does not always constitute running. Shuffling, plodding, bent at the waist and falling forward, that's not necessarily the fastest way for you to be traveling at that moment. It is a race. It's all about getting to the finish line as fast as possible. You will not gain points in the race because you maintained a running motion. it may be faster for you to do a fast-paced walk, and it may be more efficient for you to do that fast-paced walk than actually, quote-unquote, running. So this is something we see a lot, and it tends to be part and parcel to poor nutrition, poor pacing, but mostly system failure from lack of critical volume. Okay, and then miscellaneous. Just the day before and morning of, I advise people to be aware of the tire pressure in warmer climates. Places, you may not want to pump your tires up to 120 psi, especially if you're using clinchers the night before the race, as the heat from as the day goes on can raise the tire pressure. It's not always a problem, but plan to pump your tires the morning of. Do not fill your air bottle with sports drink until the morning of. I've done this in the past, and you end up with ants in your air bottle. Stay off your feet the day before the race. We recommend a maximum of 45 minutes the day before. You do your best. Do your best. Do everything you can to stay. Get a book, rent movies, on your feet as little as possible. The only reason you should be on your feet the day before a race is to go to the bathroom and drop off your bike if you're doing a triathlon. Otherwise, have someone else do it for you. Stay out of the sun. This is not a good day to sit by the pool. We see this a lot, especially at destination-type races. People will stay at a resort, and they will hang out by the pool. Don't do that. Get to the race site early the morning of, but not too early. I recommend about 90 minutes before the start. You want to be able to set up your stuff in a relaxed manner, change, and be able to go to the bathroom before the race. But you don't want to be there too early, but you want to be able to do all of this in a very relaxed manner. I recommend that people consider bringing lube the morning of, just in case it rained over the night. You really don't want a squeaky chain with any kind of rust on it. And then this is one of the things. This is a tricky one. If you're doing an Ironman, you have to pack your bike gear into the swim to bike bag. Pack your aero helmet so that the point is facing out of the helmet. Otherwise, it pokes a hole in the bag, and everything could fall out of the bottom of the bag. So just something to be aware of. And lastly, relax. Do your best to relax. I know it's a big day. You put a lot has gone into it, but just do your best to stay nice and relaxed. And don't do this. So this is me back in the, late 90s, early 2000s. No shirt, racing in a Speedo. It's not a good look. I went the wrong way there. So just some things I've learned over the years. The day will be filled with a series, and this applies to all distances, all longer distances. The day will be filled with a series of extreme highs and extreme lows. Take advantage of the highs and manage the lows. Expect that there are going to be bad times, and do your best to fight through those bad times, because there tend to be good times on the other side of those bad times. Don't pay attention to other people on the course. Worry about yourself. Ignore the drafting. I used to get very hot and heavy about seeing a lot of drafting. I have since just done my best to just ignore all that and let them do what they're going to do. I have no control over it. I can only control myself. I don't want to ruin my day because they're acting the way they are. Be prepared for things to go wrong. The success of your day may be a function of how well you manage things that go wrong. Okay, so think about what the different things that could go wrong and what you would do if they did go wrong. And to that end, I highly recommend that everyone learn how to change a tire. If you are bonking, know what you're going to do if you do bonk. For instance, just in San Juan, one of my athletes missed an aid station. He missed the Gatorade at the aid station just because he wasn't aware of how they were laid out. And so he missed the Gatorade spot, so he got water instead, which he knew was a no-no. But what he did, he kept the water because he knew he had to hydrate himself in the hot temperatures of Puerto Rico. So he drank the water, but he took a couple extra power gels to go with it to get his carbohydrate source, and he took a couple of sodium tablets to go with it as well. So he managed a bad situation. He managed it well. He ended up going on to win his age group at the race. If you sense a change in your mood, it tends to be like a bad change in your mood. Eat something immediately. Use your time on the bike not to push the pace, but to front load calories and fluid for the run. And lastly, it's just a race. Have fun with it. A lot has gone into it. It might as well be fun. And lastly, this is the goal. This is one of our athletes, Andy Salmon. I love this picture because he's right at the finish of Lake Placid, I believe, in 2009, and he had a fantastic race, and you can see it right on his face. That's the goal that we're shooting for. Okay, so we're going to enter the question and answer period. Let me just go through, and I just want to be able to unmute everybody. Where am I? Unmute all, okay. So, and then let me check out the chat. Any questions you may have? Anyone have any questions along the way?
Hey, Tim, this is Chris Kogan. I have a question for you.
Yep.
So I'm doing my first Ironman this summer, and I was surprised to hear you say that there's aid stations on the bike. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, how does that work? I mean, do you stop your bike, or and kind of, what's there, and how do you balance, what you pick up at the aid station versus what you carry with you on the bike?
Okay. Yes, there are aid stations on the bike. They tend to be spaced out approximately every 10 miles. So you would see them every, half hour, 45 minutes. They will tend to have whatever the sports drink is being served on the course. If you're doing a WTC Ironman, it's probably going to be Power Bar Endurance. They will tend to have water. They will have Power Bar products. Well, I shouldn't say that. If you're doing a WTC race, they will have Power Bar products like gels and Power Bars. If you're doing a different race, a non-WTC Ironman, then they'll probably have different kinds of gels. They'll have bananas. Some will have. That tends to be most of it on the bike course. And I recommend that you do what you feel comfortable doing. And what I mean by that is, I can go through an aid station at 20 miles an hour and grab a bottle. Okay? I can't go through at 25 miles an hour and grab a bottle. I wish I could. Some people can. I can't. So I slow down to 20 to grab a bottle. Some people don't feel comfortable doing that, and they may feel like they need to pull over. In that case, pull over, especially in an Ironman. Just stop the bike, get what you need. It's going to cost you minimal time compared to what not stopping will cost you. So that's how I would appreciate. That's how I would explain that. Definitely go with what's comfortable. And I would recommend that you do some races, maybe a half Ironman before then, to test out what you feel comfortable doing at an aid station. Some people feel very comfortable grabbing a bottle on the fly, and some people do not. And you should do what's comfortable to you. I would not concern myself with time in that respect. Did I get everything? I feel like I missed one of the questions.
Well, like how much water do you carry with you, knowing that you're going to be able to pick up stuff on the aid station?
I don't think you're paying attention.
Or how much Gatorade you carry with you?
There. I would tend to carry, for myself, I carry an Aero bottle in the front, filled with Gatorade, and I have a bottle on my bike. So I will carry, say, 24 ounces. And what I will do is I will keep the bottle on the frame and just let it sit there throughout the day, and I will feed into the Aero bottle from the aid stations as I go by. And then my last bottle that I
dump the bottle in there and you throw it out.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you have a set span of time to be able to throw it out. You definitely don't want to just get the bottle, fill up the Air bottle 5 miles down the road and throw it out, because then you're littering. But if you throw the bottle out it tends to be within sight of the aid station, then you're okay. You're not littering. That's what I tend to do. Other people like to carry a bit more. I try to limit the amount of weight on my bike. I don't like to carry too many bottles of liquid on the bike, unless I were doing the exception to that is if I were doing a race that did not have a sports drink that I like, and I don't mean the flavor, but if I was doing a race that maybe had Heed, which is Hammer Nutrition's product, I might opt to carry extra bottles of my own sports drink to limit how much of that I had to take. Okay? But for the most part, I typically recommend using a fueling plan that incorporates the stuff on the course. Okay, that's what's nice about the WTC Power Bar sponsorship right now, is that, you know, if you're using Power Bar products, it's perfect. You know, you almost don't have to carry too much because it's a catered affair out there. I definitely carry my own stuff, but if I did drop something along the way, then it's not a big jump to use something from the aid station at all. I mean, it's no jump at all. It just might be a flavor I'm not accustomed to. That's all.
Okay.
Good.
And then just one more question on the bento box. I don't know what that is, and like what do you put into it, and how does it attach to your bike?
It tends to be a fabric type box sheet structure that goes on the top tube of your bike, very close to your handlebars. Okay, and it attaches with straps, Velcro straps. Okay. And what you put into it is, I put my food into it. It's probably 6 to 8 inches by an inch and a half in size. It's not huge, but it holds enough. If you email me later on, I can send you a link to show you different options, different bento box options. Okay.
Good. And actually, just one last question. As far as being able to change a tire, so what do you carry with you? Do you carry like one extra tube or two, or like a CO2 cartridge? What do you carry?
It depends. I race with tubulars, so I carry. I will either carry a tire, or I will carry this fix-a-flat type stuff they have. If you are racing with clinchers, I would highly recommend that you probably carry 2 tubes and 2 or 3 CO2 cartridges.
2 or 3. Okay.
And your tire levers. Definitely carry tire levers. If you blow a tire, like just slice a tire, then you're going to have to wait for technical aid. That tends not to be an issue. Most tracks are very repairable. So that's the kind. And I like to carry the 2 tubes so that you're not sidelined by a flat earth, or if you mess up with if you pinch the first one because you're a little nervous. And that's why I like to carry extra CO2 as well, just in case you misfire on the first one.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Okay, and that's all, like you have like a bag at the back of your bike that you stick all that stuff in? You don't carry it on your body, right?
No, some people do, but I would stick it in my bike bag.
Okay. Yep. And actually, can I ask one last question? A heart rate monitor, the watch. Do you wear that in the water? And I mean, do you just have it on your arm the whole time, or do you transition so it sits on the bike?
I will wear the strap in the water, and then I don't wear the watch in the water just because it's so bulky that I don't like it. I would tend to put it on when I got on the bike, once I got out of the water, because you're not really collecting any data in the water.
Okay, so you just leave it on your bike.
Be careful with that, especially at like the half Ironman. Like in San Juan this past time around, I didn't wear it in the water. I didn't wear it on the bike, and I meant to put it on at the beginning of the run. I forgot, and I just didn't wear it. And then when I went back to collect my bike and my other belongings after it had walked away. Someone had taken it. So just be careful with those things. Those things are very mobile, and they're very expensive. So people like them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Tim.
Yep. Oh, I got a question here in the chat. What tire did you use at St. George? Gator Skins versus Conti 4000. I've always used the Continental Grand Prix. I think it's the Conti Grand Prix 4000. I like the tire. It's maybe not the best rolling resistance tire out there, but it's plenty durable, so it has a nice combination. It has pretty good rolling resistance, and it has pretty good durability. So it's worth I don't like a tire that's too thin some tires say they're very, very fast, but to be very, very fast and light, you have to have not a lot of material, which limits durability. I would prefer to lose a little bit on the durability. I'm sorry, no, that did not come out right. I would prefer to lose a little bit on the rolling resistance to have some additional durability. That question was from Michelle Roy. Did that get your question, Michelle?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, what was this? What are some of your take-home pearls? Oh, from St. George Ironman. Oh, St. George, that's a good one. St. George is a really, really, really nice race. A couple things. Let me start at the beginning, and I'll try to go in order as best I can. You will have to take a shuttle to the race start because there is only one way in, and they only allow race vehicles in, official vehicles, I should say. So you're going to have to take a shuttle from town into the race start. So plan your bathroom breaks accordingly. You may be on the shuttle for a little while. Not too bad. It's not a bad ride, but just be aware of that and plan that into your morning. Be aware of, I think the weather can be very fluctuating. We got it, and I think it was probably in the high 60s, very overcast, very nice day. But I do believe that there is a very high potential for a lot of heat at that race. And last year was the first year we got a day that was actually kind of chilly, and I don't think that's going to necessarily be the history of that race. Very, very, very windy, like ridiculously windy. Just be aware of that. If you are a lighter individual, you may want to be careful with your wheel choices. Lighter females may not necessarily want to ride a disc, but the disc is not the major issue. It tends to be the front wheel. You may not want to go extremely deep on the front wheel because it is very, very windy. When we arrived there the Wednesday before the race, I couldn't believe how windy it was. I thought there was no way I'd be able to ride my bike in this kind of wind. So just be aware of that. The swim is very cold, like insanely cold. So just be advised of that. I would definitely pre-swim the course or portions of the course just to be accustomed to the cold of it. The bike is fantastic, really, really nice. It's hilly, but it's not bad. The wind is probably the biggest effect. If you have like last year we had a headwind for this certain section, but the section was about 20 miles, and you have 2 loops of it. So it was very, very hard to overcome. And then there's a major descent, like a 10-mile descent, which can have some crosswinds, but they tend not to be violent crosswinds. The run itself is probably the hilliest run I've ever seen. You pretty much climb for the first 6 miles, turn around, and then descend for the next 6 miles, and then repeat. All in all, it is a really, really nice race. I highly recommend that race. Very nice. Tim, for us coffee fans, how long before an IM would you suggest giving it up so that we get max benefit on race day? Today's a great day to start, as soon as possible. I would recommend, for the most part, if an Ironman is such a such a big deal in a lot of people's lives that so much goes into it that it should take some precedence, especially as it gets near. So I would say at an absolute minimum, cut coffee out of your life the week before the race. And that would be a good minimum. Any extended time beyond that you can do is only money in the bank. So that's what I would recommend on that front. Michelle, I just want to go back to Michelle real quick. Michelle, did I answer any questions about St. George?
Yeah, thank you. And how is the sweat test performed?
Sweat test is performed. You'd have some very specific guidelines that Kate would send over to you, and basically what you would do is you would ride. You do a short warm up on a trainer, and you would you weigh yourself beforehand, and you weigh yourself after, and the actual test itself is about an hour long, and it's done at what QT2's version of Zone 2, which is probably tends to be about a half Ironman intensity. It's sub-threshold work, and what we do is we measure how much body weight you lose during that hour, and then what that does is that defines how much fluid you need to race in order to not dehydrate. And then based on a series of questions, which include your body weight, your body fat, and sodium needs, then they develop a fueling plan based around that. But the very first input is how many grams of carbohydrates are going to come from sports drink, and then because of your hydration needs, and then everything else, how many power gels or power bars or Cliff blocks you're going to need are fillers for carbohydrates based upon what you need, just from a hydration standpoint. It's something that I would really highly recommend, especially if and the thing with, if you're doing St. George, last year was so tame weather-wise, but it can. I really think it has the potential to get really, really ugly out there. And to that end, if you're going in with a good fueling plan that takes into account your hydrational needs, then you're going to be well ahead of the game if it gets really ugly out there.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions? Ted, did I answer you? Did I get your coffee question? Yeah. Anything else?
Tim, do you have any more webinars coming up?
We try to have a webinar every 4 weeks or so,
Okay.
3 to 4 weeks. They're always announced on our website on the homepage. I believe the next one. I'm not exactly sure on the date yet, but I believe the topic will be about the mental aspects of training and racing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Susan, you raised a hand. Okay. Yep. What's up?
I did.
Oh, I can't hear you, Susan. I can't.
Can you hear me?
Hey, partially. Give it a shot. Oh, there you are. Hello.
All right. I want to talk about the Boston break on the Ironman.
Yep.
How is it possible to not stop?
Oh, well.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go on the bike? Or is it just better just to stop at the porta potty? I mean, of course, if you're placing or you're trying to place in races or you're trying to win, you're not going to stop. But wouldn't you have issues as far as like maybe a rash?
Yeah. I'm gonna say, Susan. I'm gonna go with to each his own on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So first let's tackle the abilities. Myself, I require a well-sustained downhill in order to quote unquote set myself up and then be able to actually pee. Kate is actually, I believe, able to just pee. Kate can pee while running, which is very impressive. I have actually peed while running myself, but I really, really have to pee in order to do that. But she can do it pretty regularly. So that is, it's not the kind of thing that you would typically practice. So I think it's a little bit race instinctual, because you're not going to go around peeing yourself on a weekend ride, typically. So it's a little bit instinctual. I think it's probably a little easier for females, just because of the general anatomy. You have gravity going a little better for you. But we, for instance, I need to not be pedaling. That's what I need. And
good job, huh? Good. I think George.
oh, can someone in the background maybe just making a little noise. And then I guess the last thing is the rash thing. That's one of those.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I don't worry about a rash. If I get that's something I'll worry about after the race.
Okay.
If I get a rash, I get a rash. What I do tend to do though is if I pee at the very next aid station, I will grab a bottle of water and try and splash it on myself, just to do my best to offset any of that. But again, like I always think of you think of Uta Pippig. You remember Uta Pippig from the Boston Marathon?
Yeah.
Which she actually, you know, she really did the big one in the middle of the race. She didn't worry about it. She didn't worry about that then. She figured I will handle that issue after the race, and it was that important to her. So if you're trying to place or you're vying for a Kona slot, those are the kinds of things, you know, a rash. That's something that's kind of one of the wounds that has to go along with it, I guess. Unfortunately.
I guess so.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I stopped. Just so you
Yeah.
know, I stopped.
Yep, and if you can go quick, you go quick. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. Anything else?
No, that was great.
Great.
The whole webinar, that was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Oh, do you have a question?
No, I was just saying thanks for your time. You spent a lot of time.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Thanks, John. All right. Have a great night, and this will be posted probably sometime tomorrow. So if you want to review it or rewatch it or anything like that, it will be available on the in the resources area of the QT2 website. All right. Have a great night.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.